welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Turn the Page. I'm your host, Jen, and today I am joined by the writer of an absolutely beautiful book, and I am so excited to talk about it. So let's welcome our guest to our show. Hello. Could you please introduce yourself and your book?
Good morning, Jen, and thank you for having me on. My name's Elaine Neil Orr. That's my author name. I usually go by Elaine Orr, but Elaine Neil Orr. And the title of the book is Dancing Woman. Let's see, to tell you about it, it's about a young woman in the 60s, a young American woman who's married to an agricultural engineer, and she follows him to the country of Nigeria, which is on the west coast of Africa. And while he's busy at work, she's a bit despondent with not much to do. She's lost a baby. Well, she's had a miscarriage. But very quickly in the plot, she makes a precipitous choice that turns her life upside down. And she also literally unburies a treasure in her yard. And these two events create the entire novel, sustain the conflict and the actions, everything that happens from there. So it kind of starts with a bang, and I hope it doesn't let up. Um, yeah, although there's a lot of interior life in the novel. We spend the main character's name is Isabel, the young woman. We spend a great deal of time in her interior, learning about the world from her experience of being in a different culture. She grew up in Virginia, so going to West Africa in the 1960s is quite shocking for her. But she really enters the culture, and that's part of the interest of the novel as well.
Mm. Yeah, the novel is it's so rooted in time and place in a way that is very vivid and makes it very easy for the reader to imagine. And that leads me to my first question, which is kind of about world building. And, world building is something that, people tend to talk about with like sci-fi or fantasy, but I think it applies to historical fiction too, because you are evoking a time that doesn't exist anymore. So can you talk about what went into your world building process and bringing Nigeria to life in this time period?
Well, I grew up in Nigeria, so partly in the 60s and 70s. So I know this world firsthand, like I might have known North Carolina if I'd grown up here, right? But I grew up in the southern part of the country, which is, I don't know, kind of like Florida to New York in terms of difference. I mean, the North and the South in Nigeria are vastly different. Maybe it would just be better to say North and South US. They're just so different. So I did have to do a fair amount of research, actually. I should say a great amount, to try to create the North. I'd never lived among a predominantly Muslim population, for example. And so I needed to get all that right. And I hadn't lived in such a more arid uh, world. It's rainforest in the South. So, I found a research assistant and who's living in North Carolina, in northern Nigeria right now. And she was hugely helpful um, in terms of discovering, for example, where where Nick, Isabel's husband, might have planted a neem forest. Like, where would there have been land in the 60s to create a neem forest? Because I want my historical fiction to be based in reality, right? Yeah. So all of the towns are real, all of the cities are accurately drawn, all the streets, right? Everything, the Emir's palace, all of that is based in what was actually existing at the time.
Wow. Yeah, that is really fascinating to hear about your research process, and especially that you had a research assistant. I'm curious because I know that you are also a professor, unless I'm mistaken, right? Um, did your experience as an academic and maybe like also your professional contacts help you in the process of writing or researching?
I do think that having written two scholarly books before I wrote first a memoir and now three novels helped me immensely. I think the idea that scholarly writing, I'll go with the idea that scholarly writing is pretty boring and you don't really want to read it. But it can actually help you it makes you a better writer because you have to be immensely clear in scholarly writing and do a great deal of research and write compelling arguments, which is not that different from a compelling plot. So, uh, and be inventive in your research sometimes, do primary research, go find people and interview them. So I think it was an asset to me. I think it's been an asset to my writing. And it does make me want to get it right. Yeah, so I think it helps in my world building and there's this fancy word that we use sometimes in talking about literature when we're studying it, and that's verisimilitude. And it means, really conveying that sense of place, the atmosphere, the realism of the world that you're taking your characters into.
That
Yeah.
is so fascinating. And yeah, I actually really love connecting the sort of, yeah, ideas of verisimilitude to effective world building. That's absolutely fascinating to me. So there was another feature of the book that I was so fascinated with, and that is, well, the presence of a Knock statue and just like the culture of the Knock people. And I'm wondering if you could provide maybe for our listeners a little, I mean, I'm sure it's a huge subject, but a little bit of capsule knowledge about the importance of these statues and the people that they came from.
Sure. So, as I said, I live in Raleigh and we have the North Carolina Museum of Art here. And well, it's probably been 20 years ago now, I was visiting the museum and we have a really wonderful Africa collection and we have a lot of work from Nigeria. And I turned around and I saw this knock. Knocks are terracottas. Um, they're human forms, but they're exaggerated in some ways. For example, they're not realistic, really. They have large heads. They have these huge, sort of peering eyes. They look a little Egyptian to me. Um, and I don't know if I can show here, but maybe 2 feet high. Um, they were produced by a culture that existed in present-day Nigeria in the north 2,000 years ago. And they were discovered during a tin mining expedition in northern Nigeria in like the 1940s. No one knew about them. They were just turned up, and there are almost no other relics from the culture but these gorgeous works of art. And they're all terracottas, and almost all of them are men, but there are some women. And I was just so struck by this terracotta when I saw it, and I kind of put it away. And when the time was right, I began a novel really inspired by that work of art. So, one thing that is really intriguing to me about these works of art is that they appear to have been ritualistically broken, like they were made to be broken, some part of them. And so there aren't any that are whole, but it's not as though they were just broken from age. The theory of the German and Nigerian investigators who've been working on studying them is that yeah, for some maybe religious rite or something, the culture disappeared. So we don't really know what their relationship is to present day Nigerians, whether they left or died out. We just don't know. It's
That's
a mystery.
so
Yeah.
fascinating. And they play such a fascinating role in the novel too, especially a particular one. And that it does strike me as the thing that like just like as a side note, before I became a librarian, I got a PhD in medieval history. So I like
Um,
have also left I have left an academic life behind to come to this library. And like the knock culture and like all of the sort of mysteries and the unanswered questions about it seems like such a thing that an academic would like latch onto, you know?
uh-huh.
It's
Yeah, I just kept trying to go deeper and deeper um, until I kind of had read everything that had been written, and there's no kind of answer. It's almost like they were dropped from the sky, or the way these knocks, they also look a little extraterrestrial. And so, yeah, it's fascinating to try. What I like to do in fiction is to try to answer the questions I can't answer in life, to figure out what the story might be.
That's really interesting. And I imagine also like a thing that you don't get to do much as an academic because you have to be very circumspect in the answers that you give to questions, and you have to have your receipts with citations and this and
Right, right, right. But with
that.
fiction, yeah, even though I'm trying to get it historically accurate in terms of what people will do or what people might imagine about the past or how the past comes into contact with the present and influences it, that's all up for grabs, right? Because it's still happening now. I mean, we're always encountering the past in the present, and we're under the influence of the past as we move into the future. So, yeah, it's always open. It's an open book. Yeah, and you get to write it.
Absolutely. I love that. And there's something really interesting too, I think, about how all of what we're talking about also sort of in a way like speaks to Isabel's interiority and her sort of emotional journey, that it's very much about her like living between two worlds, right? And
Right.
sort of like what it means to um leave your birthplace behind and immerse yourself in a new place and a new culture, but also what it means to belong and whether you will truly belong anywhere after that or in both places and whatnot. So, can you maybe talk a little bit about how, like, perhaps was Isabel's emotional journey in terms of like her location and how she felt about being between two worlds? Did that relate at all to your own experience of living abroad?
Yeah, absolutely. I went the other direction because I was born and grew up in Nigeria until I was 16. We came to the US briefly to visit my parents' family every 4 years, but I don't have any memory of the US until I was 6, and then didn't live here permanently until I was 17. So I've always felt between worlds and not fully belonging anywhere, right? Even though I've been teaching at NC State in Raleigh for North Carolina State University for 30 years, I feel often that my background and experience are not really accessible to anyone else. Maybe my husband comes the closest to the person who knows me and understands after years and years. But so she's, though, grown up in Virginia to a working class family. Her father's an immigrant from Sicily. So I kind of planted a little bit of outsidership in her to begin with. She's working class, she's got an immigrant father. So she's a little more open, maybe than your average white girl, middle class, or affluent white girl might be at that period. So that when she goes to Nigeria, she's able to be more open. But certainly it's still culture shock, right? And she's in Nigeria for uh, how long does the novel last? 4 or 5 years. And in that period, she becomes more at home, and she doesn't really want to leave when that is on the horizon, right? She's very torn.
Yeah, it's a really beautiful interior journey. And it complements the what you might call the exterior story of like the geopolitical crisis that Nigeria is sort of like fomenting at the time. Did you have to do research into the events of 1963 in order to get that sort of the temporal aspect correct?
Actually, I had done most of that when I wrote my memoir. I was living in Nigeria when the Civil War occurred, and remember tanks coming down the street in Lagos and people coming down on the trains from the north to the south, and the stories of violence and so on. So, but as a girl, I didn't understand it. So when I wanted to write a memoir about my life, which was published in 2003, I had to do a lot of research to get that right. I wanted to, it was really important to me because the world kind of broke open. Um, like Chenoweth Chubby says, things fall apart, right? Yates said it. So the country fell apart and we were there. So that part I knew. Yeah. And I didn't really understand when I started the novel that it would be in the novel. But Isabel is so close to where some of those events occur, those violent events, it had to be. I want to say, because I think we've skirted it, that Isabel is an artist. And this is at the heart of the novel. She's kind of given up her art, her ambition to be an artist when she comes with her husband to Nigeria because she was deeply discouraged in college by the criticisms of a male artist. And so she gives it up, and that's part of why she kind of runs away with this new husband because she doesn't know what else to do. And then when things start to be to get unearthed, like this knock figure, and when her other parts of her life begin to be awakened, she decides to paint again. And so there's the interior life that's her emotional and spiritual struggle. And then there's painting, which is a kind of enactment of this journey that she's taking inside, right? And she's trying to figure it out. So there's a really strong connection between her uncovering this work of art and then her picking up her brush again. Yeah.
And that is a really a beautiful way. I don't like without revealing too much. It is a beautiful way that all of the elements of the story kind of come to speak to each other, and the external story of Nigeria and her internal journey all come together and complement each other in such interesting ways. Wow, gosh, this has been so interesting, and I just really enjoyed talking to you about this book so much. Do you think you'll write another novel? Do you think there's another one in you?
I do. This is my third novel that is at least partly set in Nigeria. The first one is set mid-19th century. And the second one is also a 60s novel. It's set largely in Nigeria, but a character travels to Nigeria and goes back to North Carolina. This one is almost all in Nigeria. The next one I think is going to be, well, it's actually I can't tell you too much, but it's a sequel to a well-known novel by a female American novelist who's dead. So it'll stand on its own, so it won't matter if you've read the novel, but if you've read it, it would be even, I hope, more fun. So, and she's going to be a bit older. I've written about younger women in the first three novels, women in their 20s. It's just such a pivotal time, young adulthood. It's a great time to write about when you're a novelist because so much happens. But a lot happens in your 40s or 50s. So this woman's going to be a little older and kind of entering a second life.
All right, well, I am very intrigued by that. So I might be in touch with your publicist when that one comes to fruition. So happy writing. And thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jen. I really appreciate your being excited with me about the novel.
Well, thank you. All right, listeners, it's now your turn. Please check out Dancing Woman. By the time that you hear this, it will be out in the world. So please head to your favorite library or independent bookstore, wherever you like to go for your books. Okay, thank you for joining us. It is now time to close this chapter.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.